You ever hear a story so disturbing, so unexpected, it just clings to your mind for days? That's exactly what happened when people first learned about Jane Andrews. She wasn't your typical criminal. In fact, she was once rubbing shoulders with royalty. Yeah, real royalty. She dressed the Duchess of York, lived the high society life, and traveled the world. But behind that polished image was a woman battling demons that eventually exploded into one of the most shocking crimes in modern British history. So, how does someone go from Buckingham Palace to prison for murder? This is the chilling story of Jane Andrews, the royal dresser turned killer. Let's rewind to the beginning. Jane was born on April 1st, 1967, in a small English seaside town called Cleethorpes. Not exactly the kind of place you associate with royal life. Her family was working class, her dad was a joiner, always bouncing between jobs, and her mom was the glue, working as a social worker and later as a teaching assistant just to keep the lights on. Life was rough. The family eventually had to move to a smaller house in Grimsby. No bathroom. Just an outside toilet. They literally had to search around the house for loose change just to afford bread. But they never told anyone how bad it really was. Despite the tough circumstances, Jane was a bright and curious kid. Her teachers noticed she was sharp. But when she hit her teenage years, things started to spiral. Depression. Anxiety. Panic attacks. Her mental health hit hard and fast. Her grades plummeted. She started skipping school, withdrawing from everything. Her mom would later find out Jane was struggling deeply with self-worth. She wasn't being rebellious, she just felt broken. It got so bad that Jane attempted suicide as a teenager by taking a bottle of pills. She survived, but the trauma stayed with her. And as she got older, she looked for validation in all the wrong places, mainly relationships that never lasted. At 17, she got pregnant. The father wasn't serious, and Jane knew she wasn't ready to raise a child. She made the gut-wrenching decision to terminate the pregnancy. It haunted her, but Jane was determined not to be stuck in Grimsby forever. She wanted more. She enrolled in a fashion design course, and after graduating, landed a job designing children's clothes at a British retail chain. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Still, she hated living with her parents. Every night she'd lose herself in fashion magazines, fantasizing about a new life, rich clothes, diamonds, luxury. She didn't just dream of success. She needed it. Then came the moment that changed her life. In 1988, Jane spotted a job ad in a fashion magazine. A young mom was looking for a dresser, someone to help with wardrobe and styling. Jane applied, not realizing she was about to step into the world of royalty. 6 months later, she got an interview. She showed up at a fancy London address and was stunned to find herself face-to-face with Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, the Duchess of York. The interview went incredibly well. Less than a week later, Jane got the call. She got the job, just like that. The girl from Grimsby had a new life, from working-class roots to walking through Buckingham Palace. She didn't make much, about £17,000 a year, but she didn't care. It wasn't about the money. It was about access. She was now flying around the world with the Duchess, meeting celebrities, and getting a taste of the life she'd only seen in glossy magazines. Jane even took elocution lessons to lose her northern accent. She started dressing like the royals, acting like them. She had a plan. She wasn't going to serve the wealthy, she was going to become one of them. And how? By marrying rich. In April 1989, Jane met her first serious love interest, an older man who worked at IBM. He was 21 years older than her. Wealthy. Polished. Powerful. The kind of man Jane had been dreaming of. The only problem? He was already seeing someone else. But Jane didn't care. They started dating in secret. Jane didn't want to be a secret for long. She pushed him to make a decision. It was her or nothing. He chose her. Within a year, they were engaged, and by August, they were married, but things didn't exactly turn out like the fairy tale Jane imagined. The spark was gone almost as soon as the honeymoon was over. The passion? Not there. They felt more like roommates than a couple. Jane got restless and, eventually, unfaithful. The marriage fell apart by 1994. Jane didn't waste time mourning. She was already seeing someone new, Dimitri Horn, a Greek businessman with serious money. Think yachts, five-star restaurants, jet-setting weekends. This was the life Jane had always dreamed of. She was finally living her fantasy, until, once again, things went off the rails. Jane's jealousy was intense. She couldn't stand it if Dimitri so much as looked at another woman. She was paranoid, controlling, and aggressive. Eventually, Dimitri had enough and ended things. Jane didn't take it well. She completely trashed his apartment, ripped clothes, destroyed belongings. Then she tried to take her life again by overdosing on pills. But once again, she survived. And once again, she was left alone and shattered. In 1997, things got worse. After nearly a decade working for the Duchess of York, Jane was fired. The official reason? Budget cuts. But behind closed doors, rumors swirled. Sarah Ferguson had started dating an Italian businessman and apparently got paranoid that he was paying a little too much attention to Jane. Whether it was true or not, Jane was out, and now, the glitzy life she had built for herself was falling apart piece by piece. Still, Jane wasn't going back to Grimsby. No way. She was determined to stay in London. She picked up a few jobs here and there, including managing the look of a hotel and then working at a luxury jewelry store, just to stay connected to the world of wealth and influence. Then came 1998. A friend set her up on a blind date with a man named Thomas Cressman. He was everything she ever wanted: tall, handsome, rich, and charming. His father was a self-made billionaire who owned car dealerships across Europe. Thomas had attended elite schools and was obsessed with fast cars and fixing engines. He was playful, successful, and totally smitten with Jane. They clicked instantly. When Jane took a trip to Greece with friends, Thomas called her every day. When she got back, he greeted her with a massive bouquet of red roses. Within 3 months, Jane moved into his house, but even in this seemingly perfect relationship, her old demons returned. She was obsessed with being the center of Thomas's world. She got jealous if he so much as spoke to another woman. She followed him around, interrupted him mid-conversation. Every single red flag she'd shown in past relationships was waving again. The truth was, Jane had one goal: to become Mrs. Thomas Cressman. She wanted the last name, the ring, the security. But Thomas, he wasn't so sure. What started as a dream would soon spiral into a nightmare. Thomas Cressman had everything Jane Andrews ever wanted: wealth, charm, good looks, and that irresistible promise of a perfect life. But the more time they spent together, the more cracks started to show. At first, it was small things. Jane couldn't stand when Thomas talked to other women, even in harmless conversation. She'd interrupt him, pull him aside, act cold and distant unless all the attention was on her. The jealousy wasn't new, it had haunted every serious relationship she'd been in, but this time, it was even more intense, because this time, Jane wasn't just in love. She was obsessed. Thomas, on the other hand, didn't seem in a rush to get married. Jane had moved into his upscale London home just 3 months after they met. And while things were good on the surface, vacations, parties, fancy dinners, he wasn't talking about rings or proposals. And Jane was getting antsy. She started dropping not-so-subtle hints, making public comments about weddings, staring him down when someone else mentioned engagements. But Thomas? Still nothing. That silence started to eat at her. One day, she did what so many people do when trust starts to crack: she snooped. She went through Thomas's emails. That's when she found it, a series of messages between Thomas and a woman he'd met on a recent flight. The emails weren't explicit. There was nothing overtly romantic. But to Jane, it didn't matter. That was enough. In her mind, Thomas was cheating. They argued. He tried to explain, said it was just a friendly exchange. Nothing happened. But Jane was furious, and more importantly, humiliated. The image of her perfect relationship was slipping through her fingers. Trying to calm things down, Thomas booked a romantic getaway, a trip to Italy and then the French Riviera. Jane agreed, hoping deep down this would be the moment. Their second anniversary was coming up. The setting was picture perfect. Maybe this was finally where he'd propose, but when they arrived, Thomas invited friends to join them. Boating, champagne, luxury, everything except the thing Jane wanted most. No ring. No proposal, and then, one night, Jane asked him point blank, "Are you ever going to marry me?" Thomas's answer hit her like a punch in the chest. He didn't just say no. He said never. He told her he was having second thoughts about everything. Jane was devastated. The return trip home was tense. Jane exploded in the car, yelling on the phone to a friend while Thomas, his mother, and nephew sat in awkward silence. It wasn't quiet rage, it was loud, theatrical. She wanted them to hear. 2 days after they got back to London, Thomas's mom, Barbara, started getting a bad feeling. She hadn't heard from her son since the trip. He hadn't returned her calls. At first, she thought maybe they'd gone away again. But the silence stretched into the next day. And the next. By Monday afternoon, alarm bells were ringing. Barbara called his office. Thomas hadn't shown up. No call. No message. No sign. That wasn't like him. Worried sick, she asked one of his employees, who happened to have a spare key to his office right across the street from his home, to check in. When the coworker entered the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. The downstairs was empty. But upstairs, that's where he found him. Thomas was lying on the bedroom floor. Still. Silent. Dead. Blood was everywhere. A knife wound to the chest. Blunt force trauma to the head. Nearby was a cricket bat, a kitchen knife, and the belt from a bathrobe used to tie the doorknob shut from the inside. It was brutal and intimate. There were no signs of a break-in. No defensive wounds. His glasses were still neatly on the nightstand. It was clear he hadn't even tried to fight back, and Jane? She was gone, her car gone. Her phone dead. At first, there was a sliver of doubt. Was she missing too? Could she have been another victim? But that didn't last long. Surveillance footage showed Jane driving alone, heading west of London. At a gas station, she looked calm. Collected. She even texted friends casually, asking, "What happened to Thomas?" As if she didn't know, but police weren't buying it. Inside the house, they found her bloody clothes discarded in the hallway. The belt used to lock the door. A handwritten note where she called Thomas mean and asked, "What have I done?" Even the drain in the shower still had traces of blood someone had tried to clean up, or at least clean themselves. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. Detectives now had one mission: find Jane Andrews. She was still in England, somewhere near Cornwall. Texts to a close friend revealed she was spiraling. In one message, she said she had taken a handful of pills. That sparked a full-blown manhunt: helicopters, roadblocks, everything. After 4 days, police found her slumped in the backseat of her car. She was barely conscious. Once again, Jane Andrews had tried to end her life. And once again, she survived. At the hospital, Jane started talking, but her story changed a lot. First, she said she didn't know anything. Then she said someone else must have broken in. Then, finally, she admitted she had killed Thomas. But only in self-defense. According to her, the relationship had turned violent. She claimed Thomas hit her, and she had started sleeping with a knife under the bed out of fear. On the night he died, she said he assaulted her, and in a panic, she blacked out. She claimed she didn't even remember stabbing him. The problem? There was zero evidence to back any of that up. No signs of abuse. No bruises. No past complaints. People who knew Thomas described him as gentle and generous, not violent or controlling. And the way this scene was staged, the locked door, the undisturbed room, it all pointed to a cold, calculated act. This wasn't self-defense. This was murder. When Jane went to trial at the Old Bailey in April 2001, the media went wild. This was a former royal dresser, someone who had once been part of the Queen's inner circle, now standing trial for murder. She stuck to her self-defense claim, painting herself as a woman driven to desperation. But the jury didn't buy it. After 12 hours of deliberation, they delivered their verdict. Jane Andrews was sentenced to life in prison. She would have to serve at least 12 years before becoming eligible for parole. But the story? It didn't end there. When the gavel came down at the Old Bailey in 2001, Jane Andrews didn't flinch. Life in prison. Minimum of 12 years. Guilty of murdering the man she claimed to love, the public watched with a mix of fascination and horror. This wasn't just another murder case, this was Jane Andrews. The elegant, polished woman who used to work for the Duchess of York. The one who'd once dined with royalty and jet-set across the globe. Now, she was just inmate #6785 at Holloway Prison, but behind the stone walls and steel doors, Jane wasn't done making headlines, because Jane Andrews didn't just fade into the background. She became a problem. A known problem. In 2009, nearly a decade into her sentence, Jane was quietly transferred to an open prison. For those unfamiliar, open prisons in the UK allow inmates who are considered low risk to leave during the day on license, essentially a work release program, then return at night. It's a trust-based system. And Jane? She violated that trust almost immediately. In November 2009, she simply didn't come back. Just like that, Jane Andrews was missing again. The media exploded. Was she fleeing the country? Planning something worse? For 48 hours, no one knew where she was. The fear wasn't just about her escape, it was about her unpredictability. This was someone who had meticulously planned a murder, manipulated public sympathy, and now she'd vanished again. Eventually, she was found holed up in a hotel just 6 miles from her parents' home in Lincolnshire. There was no wild chase, no disguise, no dramatic standoff. Just Jane, hiding in plain sight. The escape didn't tack on extra prison time, but it did delay her parole hearing. The message was clear: Jane wasn't ready to be trusted. 3 years later, in 2012, her parole was denied. But by 2015, after serving 14 years, something shifted. The parole board declared that Jane Andrews was no longer a threat to society. They released her. Just like that, Jane walked free. She moved to a quiet town in Lincolnshire, started working as a shelf stocker in a local supermarket, and tried to disappear from the public eye. But for many people, especially those who knew Thomas Cressman, this wasn't justice. This was unfinished business, and they had good reason to worry, because in 2018, Jane Andrews was arrested again, this time, not for murder, but for harassment. She was accused of obsessively contacting a married man she'd been briefly involved with, sending disturbing messages and violating his requests to stop. It wasn't just a fling gone sour. It was a pattern. Jane was sent back to prison for another year, and again, the questions resurfaced: had she changed? Or had the system simply looked the other way? During her time behind bars, Jane was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a mental health condition marked by unstable relationships, intense emotions, impulsive behavior, and a deep fear of abandonment. It's a complicated diagnosis, one that can help explain her extremes, but not excuse them. Experts said her violent outburst, her inability to handle rejection, her obsessive need for control, all of it fit the profile. But a diagnosis doesn't erase a life. Or a death. Thomas Cressman was only 37 years old when he died. He had a bright future. He was well liked, successful, and had plans. He was looking forward to starting a family. Friends described him as kind, gentle, and grounded, but because he refused to marry Jane Andrews, because he said no, his life was stolen from him. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't inevitable. Had that 999 call been taken more seriously the day before his murder, maybe police could have intervened. Maybe someone could have prevented what happened next, but that call, reporting a domestic argument, was brushed off. No one came. No report was made. The system missed its chance. And then there's that side of the story, the royal connection. Jane Andrews was never just another woman. She was, for nearly a decade, a personal dresser and confidant to Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. They had been close. Trusted. Sarah had invited her into the royal household, so when Jane's name appeared in headlines, not as a fashion stylist but as a murderer, it was a public relations disaster. To her credit, Sarah Ferguson did try to reach out during the investigation. She called Jane. She wanted answers. But Jane never responded. Years later, Sarah would describe the case as heartbreaking, but also said she believed Jane had deep-rooted issues that went untreated for too long. That might be true. But for Thomas's family, none of it changes what happened. A kind, generous man was brutally murdered. His crime? Not wanting to marry someone who couldn't take no for an answer. As of 2019, Jane Andrews lives a much quieter life. She stocks shelves. Lies under the radar. No tabloids, no spotlights. Some say that's justice enough. Others say it's a loophole in a system too quick to forget. What we know for sure is this: Jane Andrews had everything. A glamorous job. A fresh start. A man who cared about her, and she destroyed it all because she couldn't bear to be rejected. It's a chilling reminder that even those closest to power, privilege, and polish can carry the darkest demons. If you or someone you know struggles with obsessive behavior, emotional instability, or abuse, please know, help is out there. Early intervention could save a life, or prevent the kind of heartbreak that can never be undone. Thanks for watching. If this story gripped you, hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for more chilling deep dives into true crime. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next one.